This week, we're going to look at a star system that has been designated KOI-5715. But why is it called that? Well, let me explain. KOI stands for Kepler Object of Interest. It's a catalog number for stars observed by NASA's Kepler Space Telescope that show signs of potential transiting planets but are still awaiting confirmation. So it's basically a placeholder name until we can figure out if there's actually planets around that star or not. Now, it turns out this star does have planets, and in fact, one very interesting one. But first, let's talk about the star itself, because even though the star isn't the most exciting thing about this system, it is quite interesting in its own right. The star in question is a K-type main sequence star, also known as an orange dwarf. Now that doesn't sound particularly impressive, and admittedly it's not. It just means it's slightly cooler and less massive than our Sun. It's about 80% the mass of our Sun, and because of that, it's a bit cooler at about 4,200 Kelvin. For comparison, the surface temperature of our Sun is about 5,500 Kelvin. The real reason K-type stars are so interesting to astronomers is because they live for tens of billions of years. Our Sun is expected to run out of hydrogen fuel in about 5 billion years. But K-type stars don't begin fusing helium until after 20 billion years. That's enough time for planets to develop life, for civilizations to develop, and then for them to die off before the star begins to fuse helium. And so scientists think K-type stars are the perfect place to look for life, because there's enough time for complex things to evolve and happen, but not so much time that everything would have died off already. K-type stars also have what scientists believe to be a more stable habitable zone. You see, the habitable zone of a star is the region around the star where the temperature is just right for liquid water to exist on a planet's surface. This makes it the perfect place to look for life, because without water, life as we know it wouldn't be possible. Now, you might think that a star's habitable zone is a pretty well-defined thing, but that's not really the case. Scientists use a fairly complicated formula to calculate it, but they generally find that K-type stars have a habitable zone that is both wider and more stable than other types of stars. What I mean by stable is that it doesn't change much over time, unlike a red dwarf that will increase in luminosity rapidly during its maturity, potentially knocking its habitable zone out of the range that is suitable for life. So now that we know a little bit about the star, let's talk about the planets. The KOI-5715 system is known to have at least 5 planets, but one, in particular, stands out. KOI-5715, which is now known as Kepler-186f. This is the most famous planet in the system. Its initial designation was KOI-575.05 before it was confirmed and renamed. It was the first validated Earth-sized planet discovered orbiting within the habitable zone of its star. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't you just say the star is 582 light-years away? How could we possibly know how far this planet is from its star? Well, here's how. Remember, Kepler wasn't looking for planets directly. It was measuring the brightness of stars and looking for dips in their brightness that would indicate a planet was passing in front of it. By measuring the depth of the dip in brightness, we can work out the ratio between the planet's size and the star's size. Then, using our knowledge of how big stars are on average, we can work out how big the planet is. We can also measure how long it takes for the planet to orbit the star. Using Kepler's third law of planetary motion, we can then work out how far away the planet is from the star. In 2014, scientists confirmed the existence of KOI-575.05 using data from the Kepler spacecraft. At the time, this discovery made headlines around the world, and for good reason. It proved that Earth-sized planets do exist in the habitable zone of other stars, meaning that there could be other solar systems out there that could support life. Of course, just because a planet is in the habitable zone doesn't mean that it actually has life. But it does give us hope that we're not alone in the universe. Here's what we know about Kepler-186f. It's about 1.11 times the radius of Earth, making it almost exactly the same size as our planet. It orbits its star every 130 days, which is shorter than the 365-day orbit of Earth around the Sun. Because of this, we know that the planet is fairly close to its star. If it were any further away, then it would take longer than a year to orbit. But it's not too close either, otherwise it would be tidally locked to its star, meaning that one side would always be facing the star and the other side would be in permanent darkness. This would make it very unlikely for there to be life on the planet because most of it would either be too hot or too cold. We also know that it resides comfortably within the star's conservative habitable zone, the region where temperatures could allow liquid water to exist on a planet's surface. But what about the other planets in the system? There are 4 other planets in the KOI-5715 system, now known as Kepler-186b, c, d, and e. All of these planets were discovered at the same time as Kepler-186f in 2014. They are all smaller than Earth, ranging from about half the size of Earth to about 1.4 times the size of Earth. These planets are all tightly packed around their star. In fact, Kepler-186b orbits its star every 7.5 days, which is even tighter than Mercury's orbit around the Sun. That's insanely close to a star. If any of these planets were much closer to the star, they would be tidally locked to it and unlikely to support life. What's next for KOI-5715? Now that we know that there are at least 5 planets in the KOI-5715 system, the next step is to study them in more detail. Unfortunately, the Kepler Space Telescope can't really help us here because it's no longer operational. But luckily for us, there are other telescopes that can help us learn more about this system. For example, the James Webb Space Telescope could potentially study the chemical composition of the atmospheres of the planets to search for biosignatures like oxygen or methane. Or the upcoming Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope could measure the masses of the planets to better understand their composition. As we learn more about KOI-5715, it will undoubtedly become one of the most studied systems in the sky. It's already one of the most famous systems in the sky. When you hear KOI-5715, you are hearing the initial designation for the Kepler-186 system, which is historically important for hosting Kepler-186f, a landmark discovery that brought us one step closer to finding a true second Earth. And who knows, maybe one day we'll find life on this planet or one of the others in the system. Until then, KOI-5715 will continue to be one of the most famous and important systems in the sky. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on all the latest news from the world of astronomy. Thanks for watching.